The crystalline walls of the ship hummed with a frequency that made Sam Rivera's teeth ache. 3 days of captivity aboard what the tall, pointy-eared aliens called the ethereal dominion had taught Sam exactly two things. First, that Zephyrian architecture apparently required everything to glow with an unsettling inner light, and second, that their captors took themselves very, very seriously. "The royal presence will now grace you with her divine attention," announced the pompous alien guard whose ears twitched with each syllable. Chancellor Vexter, Sam had learned, possessed the remarkable ability to make even breathing sound like a formal proclamation. Sam shuffled forward in the energy restraints that felt like being wrapped in warm jelly. "Great. Does she take requests? Because I've been working on my stand-up routine." The Chancellor's ears flushed a deeper shade of blue. "Silence, primitive creature. You stand before Queen Lyrale, sovereign of the Zephyrian Empire, keeper of the luminous truth, she who commands the—" "Yeah, got it. Very impressive resume." The throne room defied every law of physics Sam remembered from graduate school. The floor seemed to exist only where needed, creating floating platforms that drifted in perfect harmony around a central dais that hung suspended in space. Hundreds of Zephyrians lined these impossible walkways, their elongated ears adorned with crystalline jewelry that chimed softly with their movements. They looked remarkably human, Sam noted, if humans had evolved with ears that could probably pick up radio signals from neighboring galaxies. Queen Lyrale materialized, literally materialized, on the central throne, her robes shifting from deep purple to silver as she settled into position. Her ears, longer and more elegant than any of her subjects, seemed to glow with their own inner light. She studied Sam with eyes the color of distant nebulae. "So," the Queen said, her voice carrying the melodic quality that all Zephyrians seemed to possess, "you are the creature that speaks without beauty, acts without grace, and somehow managed to damage 3 of our patrol vessels with a research shuttle held together by what our engineers describe as optimism and duct tape." Sam brightened. "You know about duct tape, that's actually pretty impressive for—" "Silence." Vexter's ears were now practically glowing with indignation. "One does not interrupt the royal presence with casual banter." "One does not," Sam agreed cheerfully, "but I do. It's kind of my thing." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the assembled court. Several Zephyrians' ears went pale with horror. The Queen, however, leaned forward slightly, her robes shifting to an intrigued shade of gold. "Your species," she said slowly, "appears to lack the fundamental concept of hierarchy." "Oh no, we have hierarchy. We just argue about it constantly and occasionally elect complete disasters to prove democracy works." Sam glanced around the floating throne room. "Nice place, by the way. Very magical crystal palace meets impossible geometry. Did you guys invent artificial gravity or just convince physics to play along?" "Gravity," announced a new voice, "is merely matter's opinion about where it should be. We simply offer alternative suggestions." The speaker was a young Zephyrian whose ears drooped slightly with what Sam was learning to recognize as embarrassment. Unlike the others, this one wore practical work clothes instead of flowing ceremonial robes. "Engineer Zix," the Queen said with a note of warning, "remember your place." "Right, sorry, Your Majesty. I meant to say that our gravimetric harmonics create localized space-time distortions that—" "Zix, that work by magic, and we're not supposed to explain it to aliens because it might hurt their primitive brains." Sam grinned. "I like this one." The Queen's robes flickered through several colors before settling on a deep, thoughtful blue. "You find our customs amusing." "I find everything amusing. It's a character flaw." Sam tested the energy restraints again. "Look, Your Majesty, can I call you Your Majesty, or is there some sort of formal title application process? I get that this is probably a big deal for you. First contact with humanity, cultural exchange, diplomatic protocols, all that. But I'm really just a linguist who took a wrong turn at the Proxima Centauri system." "A linguist," Vexter sniffed, his ears quivering with disdain, "who destroys 3 vessels of the Imperial fleet. In my defense, your patrol ships have terrible turning radiuses. And who designs a spacecraft that can't handle a little creative maneuvering?" "Creative maneuvering." The Chancellor's voice rose to a pitch that made the crystal walls resonate. "You performed what our sensors recorded as 17 consecutive violations of spacetime. 18, actually. You missed the one where I went backwards through that asteroid field." Queen Lyrale rose from her throne, and Sam had to admit the effect was impressive. Her robes now cycled through colors that probably didn't have names in human languages, and her ears caught and reflected the light from dozens of floating crystals around the throne room. "Human," she said, and Sam caught something in her voice that might have been curiosity. "Do you understand that you are a prisoner of the Zephyrian Empire, that your species is unknown to us, that your fate rests entirely upon my judgment?" Sam considered this. "Yeah, I picked up on that. But here's the thing, and I mean this with all due respect to your glowy throne room and your impressive ear situation. You're the ones who captured me. I was just trying to catalog some interesting radio signals near that binary pulsar when your ships showed up. So really, this whole fate in your hands thing is kind of on you." The silence that followed was so complete that Sam could hear the harmonic frequencies of the ship's crystalline infrastructure. Every Zephyrian in the throne room had gone absolutely still, their ears rigid with shock. Did it just, Vexter stammered, suggest that the royal presence is responsible for this situation? Another courtier whispered, while simultaneously insulting our ears. "I think it called them impressive," Zix offered helpfully. Queen Lyrelay descended from her throne, moving with fluid grace across the impossible architecture. She stopped directly in front of Sam, close enough that the human could see the complex patterns of light playing across her elongated ears. "In 3,000 years of Zephyrian civilization," she said quietly, "no being has ever suggested that I might be accountable for circumstances beyond my control." "Really? That seems like a pretty significant oversight in your education system." The Queen's robes shifted to a color that was definitely not on any human color wheel. "You speak as if we are equals. We're not. I am the sovereign ruler of an empire that spans 14 solar systems." "Okay, that's pretty cool. I once got tenure at a university, which is basically the same thing but with more committee meetings." For a moment, Sam thought the Queen might actually laugh. Her ears tilted forward slightly, and the impossible colors of her robe seemed to pause in their constant shifting. Then she straightened, and the formal mask slid back into place. "Chancellor Vexter," she announced, "cancel the execution protocols. Your Majesty, this creature will serve as our cultural ambassador, while I decide its ultimate fate. Perhaps it can teach us about human customs, and we can teach it about proper behavior." Sam perked up. "Does this mean I get better food? Because that purple stuff you've been serving me tastes like it was seasoned with regret and disappointment." "That," said Zix quietly, "is actually our most honored ceremonial cuisine." "Oh, well, that explains why everyone looks so sad at dinner." Queen Lyrelay's ears twitched, and Sam could have sworn she was fighting back a smile. Sam's quarters turned out to be a living organism masquerading as a room. The walls actually breathed, with a slow, steady rhythm that Sam found either deeply relaxing or completely horrifying, depending on the time of day. The ceiling occasionally blinked what appeared to be eyes, though Zix had assured them these were merely aesthetic sensory nodes, and definitely not watching their every move. "That's what someone would say if they were definitely watching my every move," Sam had pointed out. "Well, yes," Zix admitted, their ears drooping with embarrassment, "but we prefer not to mention it directly. It's considered rude." 3 weeks aboard the Ethereal Dominion had taught Sam that Zephyrians considered almost everything rude. Direct questions were rude. Mentioning obvious problems was rude. Asking why the food dispenser sometimes produced what looked like small, judgmental jellyfish was extremely rude. The Zephyrian approach to social interaction seemed designed by someone who had heard about conversations secondhand and decided to make it as complicated as possible. "Good morning, honored guest Sam," chirped the ship's AI as the walls brightened to simulate dawn. "Today's cultural exchange schedule includes morning meditation with Her Royal Magnificence, lunch preparation observation with the culinary harmonists, and afternoon philosophical discourse with the wisdom keepers." "Can I just call in sick? I think I'm coming down with a case of aggressive directness." "Ah," the AI said with what Sam had learned to recognize as digital amusement. "I'm afraid that condition is chronic among your species. Also, the royal presence has requested your immediate attendance in the Garden of Contemplative Truths." Of course she has. Does everything on this ship have to sound like a philosophical dissertation? "The bathroom of necessary biological functions would like a word." Sam had discovered that the ship's AI possessed a sense of humor that had apparently developed over centuries of serving dramatically inclined royalty. It was, the AI had confided, a coping mechanism. The Garden of Contemplative Truths was less a garden and more a vast chamber where crystalline trees grew in impossible spirals toward a ceiling that showed real-time views of distant galaxies. Queen Lyrale sat beneath one of these trees, her mourning robes a gentle amber that shifted like captured sunlight. Her ears, Sam noticed, were decorated with tiny chimes that created soft music with her every movement. "Ah, Sam," she said without looking up from the holographic scroll she was reading. "Tell me, what does your species believe about the nature of truth? That it usually gets you in trouble and makes family dinners awkward." The Queen's ears perked up slightly. "Elaborate." Sam settled onto one of the organic benches that helpfully molded itself to human anatomy. "Well, humans have this weird habit of saying what they actually think. It causes problems. Like if your friend asks if their new haircut looks good, and it looks like they stuck their finger in an electrical socket, you're supposed to lie and say it's great. But some of us can't help pointing out that they look like they were attacked by a demented lawn mower. And this is acceptable in your society. Acceptable is a strong word. Tolerated might be better. We've built entire social structures around the assumption that people will occasionally tell uncomfortable truths, and we've developed elaborate ways to pretend we didn't hear them." Queen Lyrale's robes shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. "Fascinating. In Zephyrian society, we have developed what we call the luminous truth, which is the understanding that reality becomes more beautiful when properly interpreted and presented through appropriate ceremony and grace." Sam stared at her. "So you take regular truth and decorate it. We elevate it. Right, like how you call your bathroom the chamber of necessary biological functions." The Queen's ears flushed slightly. "That is different." "Is it, though? You're taking something basic and uncomfortable and wrapping it in fancy language so nobody has to think about what it actually is." "Sam," the Queen said carefully, "are you suggesting that our entire civilization is built on euphemisms?" "I'm not suggesting it. I'm saying it outright, which I'm guessing is another thing that's considered rude here." Before the Queen could respond, Chancellor Vexter materialized through one of the garden's organic doorways, his ears practically vibrating with distress. "Your Majesty," he announced, "the High Council demands an audience regarding the cultural contamination occurring aboard your vessel." "Cultural contamination?" Sam perked up. "That sounds serious. Should I be quarantined?" "The Council believes," Vexter continued, pointedly ignoring Sam, "that prolonged exposure to this creature's directness may be affecting the crew's adherence to proper social protocols." "What kind of effects?" the Queen asked. Vexter's ears drooped with the weight of his terrible news. Engineer Zix was overheard asking the kitchen staff why the ceremonial food tastes like sadness with a hint of existential dread. 3 courtiers have begun questioning whether their daily meditation sessions are actually necessary or just tradition. And yesterday, Security Officer Kexel referred to the morning harmony ceremony as that thing where we all stand around humming for an hour. Sam grinned. "Sounds like I'm making friends." "You're making anarchists." Vexter's voice rose to a pitch that made the crystalline trees chime in harmony. "The very foundations of our ordered society are crumbling under the influence of your honesty, barbarism." Queen Lyrale rose gracefully, her robes cycling through what Sam was learning to interpret as her thinking colors. "Chancellor, perhaps we should view this as an opportunity for cultural growth rather than contamination." "Your Majesty, with all due respect to your infinite wisdom, this creature has been aboard your vessel for 3 weeks and has already convinced half the engineering staff that our traditional greeting ceremony is unnecessarily complicated and possibly designed by someone who had never actually met another person." "Well," Sam said reasonably, "it kind of is. I mean, who needs 17 different hand positions just to say hello?" "Those hand positions," Vexter sputtered, "represent the 17 philosophical foundations of ZPHYRIAN civilization." "Right, but wouldn't it be more efficient to just wave and say, hi?" The Chancellor made a sound like a deflating balloon mixed with existential despair. Queen Lyrale studied Sam with those nebula-colored eyes. "You truly believe that simplicity is preferable to ceremony?" "I think ceremony has its place, but when it takes longer to say hello than it does to explain quantum mechanics, you might want to consider streamlining the process." "And what," the Queen asked slowly, "would you suggest we do with traditions that no longer serve their original purpose? Change them or at least ask why you're doing them in the first place. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle chiming of the Queen's ear jewelry and Chancellor Vexter's increasingly rapid breathing. "Your Majesty," Vexter finally managed, "surely you cannot be considering adaptation." The High Council of the Zephyrian Empire met in a chamber that defied architectural logic, even by alien standards. Floating platforms arranged themselves in concentric circles around a central void that pulsed with what Sam had learned was called concentrated wisdom energy, but which looked suspiciously like a really expensive lava lamp. Sam wasn't supposed to be there, but the ship's ventilation system had turned out to be surprisingly accommodating to eavesdropping humans. The AI had helpfully provided directions. "The contamination spreads," declared Counselor Thesara, her ears rigid with outrage. "Yesterday, 3 junior officers questioned why our morning nutritional ceremonies require 47 separate rituals when the actual consumption of sustenance takes 30 seconds. Worse," added Counselor Murden, "the creature has convinced engineering specialist Zix to redesign our door-opening protocols. They now require only a single gesture instead of the traditional sequence that honors our ancestors' struggles with portal technology." "It's practically savage," agreed Counselor Vexter, who had apparently worked himself into a state of permanent indignation. "The being shows no respect for the beauty of complexity." Queen Lyrelay sat at the apex of the chamber, her robes cycling through colors that suggested she was having several different moods simultaneously. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should consider whether some of our protocols have grown. Unnecessarily elaborate." The silence that followed was so profound that Sam could hear their own heartbeat echoing through the ventilation system. "Your Majesty," Thesara said slowly, "surely you cannot be suggesting that 3,000 years of refined civilization should be simplified to accommodate the preferences of a primitive alien." "I'm suggesting," the Queen replied, "that perhaps we should examine why we do things rather than simply continuing to do them because we always have." "But Your Majesty," Murden protested, "tradition is the foundation of order. Without ceremony, without proper protocols, how can we distinguish ourselves from barbarians like me?" Sam called out helpfully from the ventilation shaft. The ensuing chaos was magnificent. Counselors' ears went every shade from pale terror to deep purple fury. Several began making protective gestures that looked like they were trying to ward off evil spirits. Vexter made a noise like a tea kettle achieving sentience. "How long," Queen Lyrelay asked with remarkable calm, "have you been listening, Sam? Since Thesara started complaining about the door thing. Which, by the way, Zix did a great job on. It takes like 90% less time now." "Security," Vexter shrieked. "Oh, relax," Sam said, dropping down from the ceiling with a grace that surprised everyone, including themselves. "I'm not armed with anything except uncomfortable questions and a really good memory for contradictions." The Queen's robes had settled into a deep gold that Sam was learning meant she was either extremely amused or planning something. "Very well, since you're here, perhaps you'd like to join us for tonight's formal dinner. We're hosting representatives from the outer colonies." "Is that an invitation or a threat?" "With you, Sam, I suspect there's no difference." The formal dining hall made the throne room look like a modest breakfast nook. Floating tables arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns while serving crystals drifted between guests, dispensing what the Zephyrians called harmonically enhanced nutritional experiences, and what Sam privately thought of as food that took itself way too seriously. The visiting dignitaries were an impressive collection of pointy-eared pomposity. Lord Kithara from the mining worlds wore robes that literally incorporated actual starlight. Duchess Velanda from the agricultural systems had somehow managed to make her ears glow with bioluminescent patterns that matched the seasonal cycles of her planets. And Grand Admiral Zethkal from the military frontier looked like someone had crossbred a warrior with a philosophy professor, and given the result really good tailoring. Sam had been seated at what was clearly the equivalent of the kids' table, between a nervous junior diplomat whose ears twitched every time Sam moved, and a cultural attaché who kept taking notes on human eating habits. "So," Sam said conversationally as they attempted to figure out whether the glowing purple sphere on their plate was food or a decorative element, "how exactly does the Empire expansion thing work? Do you just show up and ask nicely, or is there more of a process?" The table went quiet. Even the serving crystals seemed to pause in their graceful rotations. The Zephyrian Empire, Lord Cathara said carefully, brings the gift of civilization to less fortunate species through a process we call harmonic subjugation. That sounds ominous. What does it actually involve? We elevate primitive cultures, Duchess Valanda explained, by introducing them to proper social structures, advanced technology, and the beauty of ordered society. Right, but what if they don't want to be elevated? What if they're happy being primitive? Grand Admiral Zethkal's ears had gone completely still, which Sam was learning was usually a bad sign. Happiness is often born of ignorance. Once a species experiences true civilization, they invariably express gratitude for their liberation from barbarism. Invariably. Well, the Admiral admitted, there are occasionally those who resist enlightenment. And then what happens? The silence stretched until Queen Lyrelay cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps we could discuss more pleasant topics. Sam, how are you finding Zephyrian cuisine? I'm still not sure if I'm supposed to eat it or worship it, but it's definitely an experience. Sam held up the purple sphere. This thing keeps humming at me. Is that normal? The resonance indicates optimal nutritional harmonics, the cultural attaché said quickly, scribbling notes. It's trying to communicate with my digestive system. In a sense, yes. That's either really cool or deeply disturbing. I'm going with both. Sam bit into the sphere, which immediately began playing what sounded like a tiny orchestra. Oh wow, it's got backup singers. Several dignitaries looked physically pained. Lord Cathara's starlight robes actually dimmed slightly. Tell me about the resistance thing, Sam continued between musical bites. When species don't want to be harmonically subjugated, what exactly do you do? We demonstrate the benefits of cooperation, Zethkal said stiffly. How? Through various educational methods, such as economic incentives, cultural exchanges, technological demonstrations. And if those don't work? The Admiral's ears had now gone completely white. Sometimes more direct persuasion becomes necessary. Direct persuasion. That's a nice way to say military action, isn't it? The Queen's robes were cycling through colors so rapidly they were creating their own weather patterns. Sam, perhaps. No, this is fascinating. You've built an entire empire on the principle that everyone should be like you, and when they disagree, you convince them with weapons. But you call it education and liberation and harmony, because that sounds better than conquest and occupation and cultural genocide. Cultural genocide? Vexter's voice cracked like a whip across the dining hall. We preserve cultures, we elevate them, by forcing them to adopt your social structures and values, by offering them the opportunity to embrace a higher form of existence. And if they say no thanks, we're good with our current form of existence. The silence that followed was broken only by Sam's dinner, continuing its enthusiastic musical performance. This conversation, Lord Cathara announced, has become deeply inappropriate. Yeah, Sam agreed cheerfully. Truth has a way of doing that. After dinner, Sam wandered the ship's corridors, trying to process what they'd learned. The Zephyrians weren't just pompous and overcomplicated. They were actively conquering other species while convincing themselves they were doing everyone a favor. It was like colonialism with better interior decorating and really elaborate justifications. Heavy thoughts? Zix appeared beside them, materializing from one of the ship's many impossible doorways. Your people are basically galactic missionaries with really good weapons, aren't they? Zix's ears drooped. It's more complicated than that. Is it, though? We genuinely believe we're helping. The civilizations we encounter do often adopt our technologies, our social structures. Many of their citizens express gratitude. After you've restructured their entire society to make resistance impossible. After we've shown them a better way. Zix, do you actually believe that? The young Zephyrian was quiet for a long moment. Their ears had gone pale with uncertainty. I want to believe it. That's not the same thing. No, Zix admitted quietly, it's not. Later that evening, Sam was returning to their quarters when they heard voices from the Queen's private chamber. The door was slightly ajar, and Sam's unfortunate tendency toward curiosity overcame their better judgment. Growing increasingly difficult to maintain the narrative, Queen Lyrelay was saying. The outer colonies are questioning our methods, and now this human arrives asking all the questions we've spent centuries avoiding. Your Majesty, came Vexter's voice, surely you don't doubt the righteousness of our mission. I doubt many things lately, old friend. I doubt whether our subjects are truly grateful or The Grand Assembly transformed the ethereal Dominion *S throne room into something that looked like the universe's most pretentious courtroom. Crystalline platforms arranged themselves in perfect hierarchical spirals, each one occupied by Zephyrians whose ears were decorated with increasingly elaborate ceremonial jewelry that chimed with every movement. The sound was like a wind chime factory having an anxiety attack. Sam stood in the center of it all, wearing the same practical clothes they'd arrived in weeks ago, feeling about as formal as a hamburger at a wine tasting. Queen Lyrelay descended from the highest platform, her robes now a deep, aggressive red that pulsed like a heartbeat. Her ears, Sam noticed, were completely bare of ornamentation, a choice that seemed to scandalize several courtiers. "Citizens of the Zephyrian Empire," the Queen began, her voice carrying perfectly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. "We gather today to render judgment upon the alien creature known as Sam Rivera, who has resided among us as both prisoner and cultural ambassador." "Mostly prisoner, though," Sam called out helpfully. "Let's not oversell the ambassador thing." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Chancellor Vexter looked like he was about to have a cardiac event, his ears cycling through colors that probably violated several laws of physics. "The creature," Vexter announced, his voice shaking with indignation, "has shown consistent disregard for proper protocol, questioned our most sacred traditions, and spread dangerous ideas about the nature of truth and social order." "Dangerous ideas like maybe ask why you're doing something before you do it for 3,000 years, Sam agreed. "Truly radical stuff." Queen Lyrelay raised a hand for silence, though her robes were now flickering between red and something that looked like contained lightning. "The question before us is simple. What shall we do with a being whose very presence challenges the foundations of our civilization?" "Ooh, I have suggestions," Sam said brightly. "You could try actually listening to the challenges, instead of just being offended by them." "Silence!" Vexter's shriek made several of the smaller crystalline decorations crack. "The royal presence speaks of the glory of our empire, the righteousness of our mission to bring order to the galaxy. The what now?" Sam interrupted. "The righteousness of conquering other species and pretending you're doing them a favor. The glory of building an empire on, do what we say, or we'll demonstrate the benefits of cooperation with our really impressive weapons." The chamber erupted in outraged chatter, ears flashing every color in the spectrum and several that didn't technically exist. But Sam wasn't done. "You want to talk about foundations? Let's talk about them. Your entire civilization is built on the idea that reality is too ugly to face directly, so you wrap everything in ceremony and pretty words until you can't tell the difference between truth and the decorations you've hung on it." "The human speaks blasphemy," Lord Cathara declared, his starlight robes now burning with actual flames of indignation. "The human speaks honestly, which I realize is basically the same thing here." Sam turned to face Queen Lyrelay directly. "Your Majesty, you want to know what I think? I think you're scared, terrified actually." The Queen's robes went completely still, freezing mid-color change. "Explain." "You're scared that your entire empire is built on lies. You're scared that your people are miserable maintaining these ridiculous facades. You're scared that maybe, just maybe, being direct and honest like us, primitive, humans might actually work better than all this elaborate pretense. And most of all, you're scared that if you stop pretending to have all the answers, everyone will realize you're just making it up as you go along, same as everybody else in the universe." The silence that followed was so profound that Sam could hear the ship's crystalline infrastructure humming in harmony with itself. Every Zephyrian in the chamber had gone completely motionless, their ears frozen in whatever position they'd been when Sam started talking. Queen Lyrelay's robes had gone completely colorless, not white, not transparent, but the complete absence of color, as if the fabric itself had stopped trying to interpret her emotions. "You think," she said slowly, "that I don't know what I'm doing. I think you're doing exactly what everyone does when they're in charge of something too big and complicated to really understand. You're improvising, hoping nobody notices, and drowning the uncertainty in ceremony so nobody can tell where the actual decisions end and the theatrical presentation begins. And this is acceptable to you. It's human. We're all just figuring it out as we go. The difference is we mostly admit it. Well, some of us do, the honest ones anyway." Queen Lyrelay stepped closer, and Sam could see something in her nebula-colored eyes that might have been relief. And if I were to admit that I don't have all the answers, that perhaps our methods of expansion have been less than entirely benevolent, that maybe 3,000 years of tradition might include some ideas worth reconsidering, then you'd be the most honest ruler in galactic history. And also, Chancellor Vexter added desperately, completely unfit for leadership according to every principle of Zephyrian governance. Yeah, Sam said, that's kind of the point. Maybe those principles need an update. Queen Lyrale looked around the chamber at her assembled nobility, all frozen in various states of shock and indignation. Her ears, Sam noticed, had begun to glow with a soft, warm light, not the decorative illumination of ceremony, but something more natural, more genuine. Citizens of the Empire, she said finally, I have a confession to make. I don't actually know what I'm doing. The gasps that followed probably registered on seismic sensors throughout the ship. I have spent my entire reign pretending to certainty I didn't possess, making decisions based on traditions whose original purposes I've forgotten, and maintaining systems that serve ceremony more than people. Her robes began to shift again, but now the colors seemed warmer, more organic. And I suspect I'm not the only one. Your Majesty, Vexter pleaded, surely you don't mean to. I mean to try something new, old friend. I mean to ask questions instead of just providing elaborate answers. I mean to see what happens when we value truth over beauty, function over form. She turned to Sam with what was unmistakably a smile. I mean to learn from someone who thinks 18 violations of spacetime is a reasonable solution to a navigation problem. 19, Sam corrected. I've been working on my technique. Of course you have. The Queen's laugh rang through the chamber like silver bells, and her ears were now glowing so brightly they cast actual shadows. Sam Rivera, I hereby grant you full cultural ambassador status, with the understanding that your primary duty is to continue asking uncomfortable questions and refusing to be impressed by our elaborate nonsense. I can definitely do that. It's like you've offered me my dream job. Furthermore, the Queen continued, I hereby establish the Commission for Practical Governance, whose mandate is to examine our traditions, protocols, and policies with an eye toward actual effectiveness rather than ceremonial beauty. Who's going to run this commission? Sam asked. Queen Lyrale's smile was radiant. Engineer Zix, who has already proven remarkably capable of improving our door protocols and is apparently immune to the temptation to make simple things complicated. Zix, who had been watching the proceedings from a maintenance platform, fell off in surprise. Their ears were glowing so brightly they looked like tiny suns. And what about the expansion program? Sam pressed. The harmonic subjugation thing will be suspended pending review. Perhaps it's time we asked our subject worlds what they actually think of our benevolent guidance. They might not like the answers. Then we'll deal with the truth instead of the pretty fiction. You've taught me that reality doesn't become less real just because we don't look at it directly. 6 months later, Sam stood in what used to be called the Garden of Contemplative Truths, and was now simply known as the place with the weird trees. The crystalline branches still grew in impossible spirals, but now they hosted a collection of research stations where Zephyrian and human scientists worked together on projects with names like Practical Gravimetrics and Honest Food That Doesn't Judge You. Queen Lyrale approached, wearing robes that shifted through pleasant blues and greens, colors that Sam had learned indicated genuine contentment rather than ceremonial obligation. How goes the revolution? Sam asked, messily. Exactly as you predicted. The Queen's ears twitched with amusement. 3 colonies have declared independence, 2 have requested increased autonomy, and 1 has asked if they can keep our healthcare system while discarding our social protocols. And we said yes to all of them. It turns out people are much more cooperative when you're not forcing them to cooperate. Who could have predicted that? Anyone who thought about it for 5 minutes instead of spending 3,000 years developing elaborate justifications for not thinking about it. Sam grinned. You're getting pretty good at this honesty thing. I have an